These are the key tips on how to plan the perfect or near perfect football session. Now, the first tip we need to talk about is always having a clear objective for your session. Now, it might sound obvious. However, I want you to think about this in a really simple manner, okay? Now, a lot of the time when we're planning a session, we might end up having a lot of different things we want to get out of it. For example, working on our long passing and working on our shooting and working on our positioning. When you're planning a session, it is important that you only have one focus. Even if that focus is really small, it's not a big focus. Even if it's really tiny, like working on your long passing, that could be your entire session plan. It could be your entire session, just talking about how to work on your long passing, or just how to work on your defensive positioning, or how to build up. Or it could literally just be one word. Your entire objective for your session could be one word, and that could be pressing. That's it. Keep it as simple as possible, because not only will you confuse yourself, but you're also going to confuse those who you are teaching. If I have one clear objective, that's all you need. That's genuinely all you need. One clear objective and you will be fine. And that's what I'd say is the first important thing you need to keep in mind of. One clear objective is all you need. The second tip on how to plan the best session is repetition. When you're looking back on your sessions, I want you to reflect on your most recent session. How much did you actually repeat the activity? How many opportunities did you give the children or the players or the men or whatever to actually embed that within their muscle memory? How many opportunities did you give them? How many chances did they have to get better at the very thing you wanted them to do? Once you reflect on that, you'll realize that you're maybe not giving as much opportunity for them to do it. Because sometimes you only have an hour for a session sometimes. That's fine. As grassroots coaches, that's what happens. You get an hour, maybe hour 15, and you dedicate 10 to 15 minutes to an activity. Now, the problem is by the time you explain, by the time you get set up, by the time they understand, you're already halfway through that time. Now, makes sense, happens. However, what I'd say is when you're planning sessions, allocate more time. Be more flexible in your structure. That's a mix of two tips actually, but be flexible and make sure there is repetition incorporated. If you're working on playing out from the back, make sure you're doing that again and again and again. A lot of the times, to be good at coaching, you don't need to do so many fancy things at once. Because not only will you confuse yourself, you're also going to confuse your players. And no one's learning that way. Neither you nor the players. None are getting better. No parties are really benefiting from it. So pick one or two things for your objective and make sure you're repeating those as much as possible. Because those are the things that are going to help you and your players, and most importantly, it's about the players, to get better. So reflect on your most recent session. Easy action point. Are you making sure there's enough repetition? The answer to both of those, the answer to that should definitely be yes. If not, think about how you can make things longer. Think about how you can repeat more. Now, another point which I want to make alongside that is, are your practices game realistic? Are they game realistic? Now, what do I mean by that? If you're playing 11-a-side, can the activity you've presented be operated in an 11-a-side situation? Now, as an example, when you're doing things like 1v2s, 2v2s, 2v3s, they're amazing, an amazing way to teach players how to do things in such a situation, because as we know, in 11-a-side game, it's just a load of 1v2s, 2v1s, whatever. A lot of underloads, a lot of overloads. We already know this. Now, sometimes the realism comes in the way you explain things. Maybe the ball comes in from midfield and it's one defender versus two attackers and you're through on goal. That's realistic. So ensure that realism is incorporated. Make sure, even if it's just an explanation, it doesn't have to be an 11-a-side game every session. What I'm saying is, even if it's just an explanation to your players as to where this is going to be useful, because you could argue every drill, every activity ever could be realistic in some way. It's just how you explain it. It's just how you come across with it. It's just you make it clear that this is the point of this. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind of. So repetition, realism, very important things. One thing I want to mention on how to plan, and when you're planning, you need to keep this in mind and sort of front of frame, and that would be transition between drills. Now, as a grassroots coach, as I've said before, you don't get much space, you don't get much time. So how do you then transition quickly, especially if you're on your own? When you're planning, the best way to think about this is try to use the same cone setups for different drills. What I mean by this, on a very simple example, all you need is a line of cones going down the middle. You might have a goal the other way. You could use that as a possession game. Maybe you could put some lines on the width. Maybe you could do some possession with some wide players. After make some passes, it's like a 1v2. And then that turns into a game where it's an attack v defense with some wide players. Something like that. Okay? So when you're planning, make sure, or sometimes it's hard to do so, but as much as possible, make sure the cone setups are lined up in a way where with just a small tweaks, or maybe not even any tweaks, you're able to completely change the drill, not completely change it, but get into your next activity as smooth as possible. As grassroots coaches, we don't always have the facility to have more than one coach, have lots of equipment, have lots of space. So making these transitions quick makes it easier, not just for us, but for our children as well. And ultimately it's about them. So all these improvements are for them. So make those transitions quick and think of ways of how you can use the same equipment setup across different activities. Long term, that will really help you, and it's a really important thing to learn. And to be honest, it comes with time. Even I don't do it properly sometimes, but I think it's something that we can all improve, and with time we get better at. Another tip, which might sound a bit vague at first, but stick with me, is make sure you are breaking down your session. Now, the way I like to break my session down is always start with some kind of warm up. So it's some sort of muscle activation. So I'd say do stretches. Stretches are very important. Make sure they're not static. Make sure you're moving. Probably want to incorporate some static stretches as well within that. And after that, you can move it to some ball work. Now, in terms of ball work, the way I would progress it up, and eventually you'd want to end with some kind of game, because that's how you want to progress through a session. It's probably a good way to do it. Sometimes I start with a game, but that's because I want to teach my kids that, you know, sometimes you don't always have to play games all session. We need to learn other things. However, the way I like to progress this is you'd always start with a sort of players on their own sort of situation. And what I mean by that is, if we're learning how to press, maybe they're not actually tackling anyone, they're just practicing the movement of pressing, and then you can develop into that with including the ball and making sure when they're pressing they get the ball off someone, and then progressing it into a 2v3 pressing style drill or rondo, and then progressing it up with more players. Ultimately, you're slowly building up towards that game situation. So in that regard, having that clear objective is very useful, because then you can have your final objective, what you're working towards, and you can build back from it. You can build back, you can strip away all the layers, and you can build back from that objective to make sure you do reach it. So that's my best advice in terms of breaking down sessions. Start with the objective and go backwards. I think that is the best way to do things. Now, the last tip I'm going to add for this video is that always end your session with some kind of brief, debrief, Q&A, that sort of thing. I would argue it doesn't even have to be at the end of the session. It could be at any point during the session. The whole idea of this is that you can get some feedback on not just how they think they did, but on how you did. You can be completely transparent with them. You can ask them, what do you think the objective was? Like literally, you could say to them at the end of the session, what do you think the objective of the session was? And if they can't tell you in 1 or 2 words, you failed. You failed. Because they should be able to tell with certainty, with clarity, that this is the objective. So just ask this at your next session, another action point for you guys. At your next session, at your next football session, at the end of the session, ask your kids, what was the objective today? What will we be learning? And if they can't tell you without going, then you have failed. And it is your fault. Unfortunately, it is your fault. However, it's good feedback, because it helps us learn, and we can use some tips in this video to get better at that. So it's always good to ask the kids, see how they feel, what are they saying, because ultimately they're going to give you the reality, they're going to give you the truth, they're on the other receiving end of it, so why not? So these are all the tips that I had. Let me know if you have any more down below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.